We are very happy to have a different type of grand rounds today, a presentation on kind of medical humanities. And I'm happy to introduce a former faculty member, adjunct faculty member here in the Department of Neurology, Dr. Paul Bentheim, who is a neurologist who has thought out of the box over the years and has authored a book called The Brain Training Revolution about trying to develop healthy aging in the brain. And Paul, I will kick it over to you. And thank you for doing this morning.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. It's good to be back at my alma mater, at least virtually. I'm a graduate of the medical school there. And hello from Phoenix and your younger sibling medical school here, where Dr. Standley and I are on the faculty. So I want to acknowledge at the outset Dr. Labiner and Regina Julaine Kohler for their support in organizing this out-of-the-box grand round. The presenters today are Dr. Standley, who's professor of physiology and director of the Art in Medicine program at the College of Medicine here in Phoenix, and Gary, who you've heard from. Gary is the founder and executive director of the Alzheimer's Poetry Project in Brooklyn, New York. The next slide outlines our learning objectives. And the basic theme today is visual learning, neurology and art, with an emphasis on the contributions by Cajal, Santiago Ramón y Cajal, the father of modern neuroscience, and Federico Garcia Lorca. And so the three related themes we're going to discuss are the overarching importance of visual learning and its importance for all of us, but specifically for medical students and their education. And I would just note that in my opinion, there's no more visually oriented specialty in medicine than neurology. And I remember my mentors, including Dr. Sibley, who was the chairperson of neurology when I was a student, Bud Rowland at Columbia, Audrey Penn at Columbia, Bob Fishman in San Francisco. They would watch patients walk to the examination room, observe small details during the examination, and from this they would glean from the sensory inputs and develop localization and differential diagnosis. And you know, the best neurologists are able to do that, and we're now in a sense handicapped by our reliance on imaging, MRI and the like. But the beauty of neurology is in the interaction of the patient and the observance of the patient. And then we're going to do a brief recap of the pivotal and seminal importance of Cajal's discoveries using a microscope less sophisticated than what you find in a high school biology lab today. And virtually all of modern neuroscience rests on his shoulders. And then Gary is going to develop the theme on how the Spanish playwright and poet Federico Garcia Lorca learned of Cajal's drawings and how those drawings influenced his art and his view of the world. And those influences on artists continue to this very day. So the next slide is actually a writing of Cajal, and I highlighted in red some of his language, how he likens the gray matter to a flower garden with its delicate and elegant forms, and the mysterious butterflies of the soul, the beating of whose wings may someday clarify the secret of mental life. And then he points out the Purkinje cells in the cerebellum and what he called the psychic cell, the pyramid cell, we refer to as pyramidal cells in the cortex, and how they have these charming attractions. And I think all of us who are in neuroscience recognize the really unbelievable aesthetics of the human brain. Okay, Gary, let's go to the next slide. So there's beauty in science, there's beauty in science, and there is science in art. And Cajal, I think, more than any other individual, pointed that out through his work. So the next series of slides, Gary, I think we'll just spend a few seconds on each one. Slides 5 through 14, and these are drawings that Cajal did in his literally thousands of hours peering through his microscope. So Gary, maybe you spend 5-10 seconds on each one. And
well, I'm going to take over now, Paul, and thank you very much.
Okay.
So I'm going to direct our watchers and viewers' attention to the drawings by Ramón, Santiago, y Cajal and the various structures of the brain. In our talk, A Synapse of Art and Science, Neurology in the Gardens of Spain is a reference to the musical composition by Manuel de Falla, Nights in the Gardens of Spain. We are metaphorically in the gardens of Spain. We are in the churros y chocolate cafes, the deep song caves of the hills of Granada, with the Alhambra hovering over the city like a child's dream of a castle, the stomp, clap, click, and cry of flamenco, the midnight dinners sharing tapas and red wine, and even the flash of bandilleros in the problematic bull ring. Out of this culture comes both the person, as Paul has mentioned, that many people consider the father of neurology, Ramón Santiago y Cajal, and the incredible poet and playwright and artist Federico Garcia Lorca. What environment led science to spill into the pen of Garcia Lorca? How did drawing and the deep looking that one takes when creating art bring Santiago y Cajal to his Nobel Prize winning theory? We know that the drawings that we are looking at are not direct representations, but a synthesis of Santiago y Cajal made after many hours of looking at the slides prepared using the Golgi Stain method. He studied the slides and structures of the brain and then created these beautiful artistic renderings. Indeed, he looked and drew with such skills of observation that he was able to intuit how the brain works. We are now in Spain of 1887. Santiago Cajal becomes the foremost practitioner of the Golgi Stain method, but he wants more detail, so he alters the staining technique by introducing silver nitrate to the tissue in 2 shorter soaks rather than the 1 long soak. That alteration improved the color and detail of the stain. Ramón y Cajal used the results to develop the neuron doctrine, which stated that neurons were individual cells that transmitted electrical impulses to and from each other. And we will hear Dr. Bendheim shortly, and he will address in more detail, as well as current neurology. Golgi and Ramón y Cajal shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1906. But they held opposing theories of how the brain worked. Golgi spoke first at the ceremony, and Ramón y Cajal listened as Golgi held forth on his theory, even though his co-award was for the Stain method, not his thinking on the brain. Ramón y Cajal was the gracious Spanish gentleman and did not embarrass Golgi by drawing attention to his refuted theory and understanding of the brain. Please allow us to again emphasize Ramón y Cajal's breathtaking breakthrough work was the result of countless hours of looking, drawing, and thinking about the many structures of the brain that he looked as an artist looks until he knew how the brain must work. And Dr. Standley will further address this way of looking in her section of the talk on visual thinking strategies. The existence of a synapse, which was later confirmed with the invention of electron microscopes, making it possible to produce detailed images of neural structures. So throughout this talk, we hope to inspire, perhaps challenge you to think about ways that the art might play a role in deepening your studies and even add richness to your life. I will return with more about Garcia Lorca, and now we hear from Dr. Bendheim.
I would the drawing of the cerebellum that Gary just showed is the cover of this book, The Beautiful Brain, and I would urge all of you who don't own a copy to acquire a copy. It's based on the first really retrospective collection of Cajal's work in museum display, which was organized in 2017, right, Gary, by the University of Minnesota in conjunction with NYU and the Cajal Institute in Spain. Anyway, I was privileged enough to be in New York to see this show. The book does justice to it. It's worth acquiring. Okay, so a bit of neuroscience history. Gary's alluded to it. So Golgi developed the black reaction. That was what he and his colleagues called the stain that he developed. Now we know it as the Golgi stain. And as Gary mentioned, he received the Nobel Prize in Medicine, shared with Cajal 50-50. His lecture was the day before Cajal's lecture, and it was called The Neuron Doctrine, Theory and Facts. By the time the Nobel Prize was awarded, a growing number of scientists, led by Cajal, had determined that, in fact, the brain was not one mass of interconnected cells, as Golgi proposed and defended and basically attacked others who did not agree with him, but that neurons were individual cells. And so Cajal's discovery of this followed on the backs of the discoveries by Schwann and Schleibel, who many of you remember from your medical school days. So the next slide now, we're going to get into a few more details about Cajal, who is undoubtedly correctly called the father of modern neuroscience. His life work was peering through this microscope, and I think Gary has a picture of the microscope later. If not, take my word for it. It is more simple than what you see in a high school biology lab now. He produced over 3,000 drawings based on observations through what we would call thick slides, thick sections, so he could see structures at multiple depths as opposed to thin sections, which are, I think, prevalent now. And from that, he developed two theories. One was the neuron theory of the brain, that the brain was composed of individual cells that were not continuous, but they were contiguous. And he discovered what we now call the neurosynapse, that was, as Gary said, only confirmed 50 years later by electron microscopy. And the other amazing theory he proposed was the law of dynamic polarization, that nerve cells were polarized, that dendrites served to promulgate information toward the cell body, and axons promulgated information away from the cell body. That is now not a theory, but a principle of neurophysiology. There are exceptions to it that have been discovered in the last 10 or 20 years, but that is a basic law of neurophysiology. So his Nobel Prize and his lecture was the day after Golgi, and it was called The Structure and Connections of Neurons. And he was very gracious, as Gary alluded to, in acknowledging the fundamental work of Golgi and many others. And as I've alluded to earlier, his brilliance and excellence as both an artist and scientist continue to inspire and influence both disciplines today. And we'll now move to the next slide and see some examples. So, and here are stains by Golgi. Those are his actual slides on the far right and drawing of neurons in the middle. And to the left, I've juxtaposed a painting by Mondrian of a tree done in 1912. So more or less contemporaneous. And Gary, the next slide. And here to the left are images developed by Golgi, but labeled as Cajal, meaning he used the derivation of stain that Cajal had derived from Golgi's basic black stain. And I've juxtaposed a painting that actually preceded that by Starry Night that many of you know, Vincent van Gogh's iconic work. The next slide. So I want you to relax, just enjoy this. The aesthetics of neuroscience are unparalleled, and really Golgi Stain, Cajal's derivation on that, and Cajal's work continue to amaze me every time I look at it. So here you see both Cajal's drawings, the basically black and white panels, juxtaposed with the stains that he was looking at through his microscope. Okay, next.
I almost want to just take a deep breath. This one's so gorgeous. Just, wow.
Yeah.
That is really great, Paul.
Okay, the next. So now here is Cajal's drawing of, I think this was rabbit hippocampus on the left. And I juxtaposed it with a paper that I referenced in writing my book, Synapse Formation on Neurons Born in the Adult Hippocampus. When I was a medical student, we didn't know there was neurogenesis in the adult brain. And this paper by Torrey et al., Fred Gage was the senior author, shows a synapse formation on new neurons in the adult hippocampus. And you can see, the advances in microscopy and staining techniques and what colors do. But juxtaposed to Cajal's drawing through that microscope, you understand his seminal importance in the whole history of neuroscience imaging. Okay, next. So, and then he wrote a paper in 1897, Advice for a Young Investigator. And I've taken the 7 points that actually are from a modern rendition of this paper done by a professor at the College of Franklin and Marshall, Michael Anderson. And this is really for the young investigators in the audience. And I would recommend that you look up this reference from the Dana Forum on Brain Science, published 5 years ago. So the 7 bits of advice he has, the only thing in your power is your preparation. Your learning is critical for your future work. Be suspicious of brilliance. When somebody is called brilliant, take it with a grain of salt. Be respectful of authority, but no more than that. Balance, concentration, relaxation. This is what we all call now life-work balance. And I'm not sure Cajal practiced that himself. Don't worry about what your research is good for. All science is worthwhile. And it's amazing how science done 5, 10, 20, 30 years earlier will eventually find the light of day. Favor independence over resources. Don't give up your independence as an investigator because someone offers you resources that are going to steer you away from your passion. Embrace scientific Panglossianism, meaning look at the entire spectrum of science and don't neglect to pay attention to where it may lead. Okay, so I think I have just a couple more slides just to show you the beauty of current imaging. This is what's called the Brainbow Hippocampus. It's a micro etching done by a PhD who's become an artist, Greg Dunn, and that's of the hippocampus. And you can see, if you appreciate colors the way I do, the brilliance of this photograph of this etching. Okay, next. And this is an outlier, but because my interest, my passion is Alzheimer's disease and dementia, I couldn't but notice that Frank Gehry's architectural design, and actually this is the building of the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health in Las Vegas, looks to me like an architect said, what would a building that represents the degeneration of a brain from Alzheimer's disease look like? And when I first saw this building, that was immediately my thought. This is an architect's idea of what Alzheimer's disease does. But surprisingly, when I mentioned this to the director of the Institute, he said, "Oh, no one's ever said that before." Okay, Gary, I think that's the end of my time. Oh, no, there's one. This is a quote from Cajal's Nobel acceptance speech. "The brain is a world consisting of a number of unexplored continents and great stretches of unknown territory. We have several orders of magnitude more knowledge about the brain than Cajal and his contemporaries had 100 plus years ago, but we're still just barely scratching the surface. So all of you the medical students, young investigators, you are entering into a universe of discovery that I think is unparalleled in the history of medical science. The brain is by far and away the most complex object in the universe. And every day, more fascinating examples of its complexity and its uniqueness and its ability to create are unraveled for us." So that's it for me, Gary, I think, until the very end. So I want to mention, I'm not sure we did, there's references attached and brief bios of both Cajal and Lorca that are attached, I think, in the chat.
Yep.
And at the end, we'll have time for questions.
Thank you, Paul. That was really, really brilliant. As we shift into the Lorca section, I would be remiss if I did not take a moment to recognize the many fabulous haircuts of Lorca through the years. From his kindergarten class with a stylish hat in the red square there, to smoking hot teenage heartthrob, to turban-wearing leaping Lorca, we take a moment to say, que guapo. The overall question of the influence of Santiago Ramón y Cajal on Federico Garcia Lorca, and specific questions like, did they meet and how did he directly influence Lorca's drawings, are addressed in a book called New Lenses for Lorca, Literature, Art, Science, and the Edad de Plata by Cecilia Kavanagh, published in 2012. The book began as her doctoral dissertation and led to her living in Spain for a period of time and to direct contact and support with the Ramón y Cajal and Garcia Lorca families. Madrid is the physical location of Ramón y Cajal and Garcia Lorca during the Edad de Plata, or Silver Age, but more specifically, it's the Residencia de Estudiantes, or student residences, what we would most certainly and colloquially refer to as the student dormitories, or the dorms. Did it happen in the dorms? Yeah, bro, party in the dorms. In this, Lorca's well-known essay, Theory and the Play of Duende, he states, ladies and gentlemen, between 1918, when I entered the Residencia de Estudiantes in Madrid, and 1928, take note that he was a 10-year student. When I left, having completed my study of philosophy and letters, I had listened to around 1,000 lectures in that elegant salon where the old Spanish aristocracy went to do penance for its frivolity on the French beaches. Longing for air and sunlight, I was so bored, I used to feel as though I was covered in a fine ash, on the point of changing into peppery sneezes. So no, I don't want to have that terrible blowfly of boredom enter this room, threading all your heads together on a slender necklace of sleep and setting a tiny cluster of sharp needles in my listener's eyes. Ouch. In a simple way, in that register, in my poetic voice, holds neither the gleams of wood nor the angles of hemlock nor those sheep that suddenly become knives of irony. I want to see if I can give you a simple lesson on the buried spirit of saddened Spain. So let's cut to the chase. There is no evidence that Lorca and Cajal met. However, they did hang out in the same cafes. They did have similar circles of friends. Lorca would have been a young whippersnapper, and Cajal a Nobel Prize winner and de facto head of the Residencia de Estudiantes. You could think of him as the ultimate resident advisor or the mega scientific genius RA. Can you imagine Paul having a problem in the dorms and getting to go to Cajal to ask his advice about your love life or something? So in this slide, we see Salvador Dali, Moreno Villa, Luis Banal, Federico Garcia Lorca, and Pedro Grafias relaxing at the Residencia de Estudiantes. Here is a well-known quote from Banal. He says, you have to begin to lose your memory, if only bits and pieces, to realize that memory is what makes our lives. Life without memory is no life at all. Our memory is our coherence, our reason, our feeling, even our action. Without it, we are nothing. Now, Bunal is saying this in the 1920s. With our current thinking around the use of non-pharmacological arts interventions to help people best navigate living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias and other issues of cognitive impairment, we have a more nuanced understanding of the relationship to memory and the essence of personhood. Perhaps this is best stated by Anne Basting, the MacArthur Fellow winning, which is also known as the Genius Grant, a winning author, and her motto is, forget memory, try imagination. I will show a short video later that demonstrates how in the Alzheimer's Poetry Project, I've developed methods to use participatory arts that puts creativity and imagination at the core of elder and dementia care. So let's return to the cafe culture, that fabric of Spanish social scene during the Edad de Plata. And as this ground rounds is happening early in the day, I shall offer to you my poem, Coffee Science. The scientific principle on which coffee works is thus. People like to feel the blood crank, like to wheel and carp, speed up time, whirl veins. Even the richest man enjoys a golden goose, dangling coins, pulling the slot machine, amphetamine, handle of wealth, the sweet brown juice of Buddha, the hot cup of Jesus Joe, the Java witch hunt of the Catholic sugar and cream. If coffee were a drug, golden eggs would only purchase a demi-cup, a piccolo, a pinch of crystal grounds. If coffee was a drug before drugs were drugs. So mama, please don't let your babies grow up to drink tea. Don't let your babies go up to drink tea. She's got coffee breath. We kiss. I taste the bohemian splendor of her Borneo Kona blend. Hold on to your berets. My goatee's on fire. I'm Captain Cappuccino. I'm speaking espresso esperante. Drink, mateys. Starbucks started out with Ahab in the search for the white Leviathan, and now he's a chain of coffee clutches encircling the globe. World domination? No, world caffeination. That's the secret. Speed up the neurotransmitters, racing through the synapse like a loose freight train. Release some endorphins. That's the magic. The test tube, the reason you reach for the black hole, the cup of Tesla's coil. Who put the fee in coffee? Who put the E in we? Who put this T in front of me? I prefer the ear in beer. Are you listening? I drink to forget all the bad coffee in the world. We'll now look at a few of Lorca's drawings that are directly influenced by Cajal back in the Spanish cafe. We see with our own eyes, and here we can see that, and then a close-up that is pretty much just taken directly from one of Cajal's drawings. Lorca adds a sort of artistic component to it. Here's another example. Again, we can see this is almost directly a Cajal drawing, somewhat simplified perhaps, and a close-up of that. As we look at the flourishing of science and arts in Spain, and the name of this talk, Neurology in the Gardens of Spain, a synapse of art and science, we draw that from Manuel de Falla's Nights in the Gardens of Spain. In this brief video by Shenfin Xu, a faculty member at UA, he shows protein fluorescence intensity increasing in pyramidal neuron upon calcium binding. It's showing neuron activity at the cellular level in live time. We're going to couple this with the opening of Lorca's most famous, well-known poem, Romance Somnambula, and we're going to hear a passage from Nights in the Garden of Spain by de Falla. Verde, ti quiero verde, green, how I want you green. Verde viento, verde ramas, green wind, green branches. The ship out on the sea and the horse on the mountain with shade around her waist. She dreams on her balcony. Green flesh, her hair green, with eyes of cold silver.
Good morning, everyone. These are my drawings. I attempted to step into the world of Cajal and Lorca. On the left, I started with the Lorca drawing and added Cajal's vision of what the retina looks like and the various cell types there. And then on the right, I started with Cajal and then added some Lorca on top of that. And while doing this, I appreciated how Cajal must have seen the beauty in the neuron, the mesmerizing patterns, and of course, his intricate attention to detail. And I appreciated that Lorca must have had some fun and all the fun that he invoked into his drawings. Next slide. Cajal called himself a visual type, and he maintained that his thought process was based in visual experience and expression, and that he learned by seeing, observing, taking things apart, rather than reading, memorizing, or listening to dry lectures. He thought his memory was weak for words, but much stronger when he could associate the word or the idea with a visual perception. His most famous drawing, the pyramidal neuron, was likely composed after looking at hundreds of brain slides. And he described the power of drawing as an aid to perception. And he's quoted as saying, "When I look at something, I do not see it unless I make an internal decision to draw it. What has not been drawn has not been seen." And Cajal's interest in visual arts prompted him to focus on the general form, the common properties, the essence of the specimen's overall architecture. And his focused looking helped him to identify underlying forms where others saw only lines, and his ability to recognize representative trees within a forest of neurons and connections was almost unique for the time. Next slide. Cajal was likely practicing what we now call visual thinking strategies. And this is an arts-based instructional strategy that's derived from the study of literature and art history. Participants are prompted to look closely at a work of art and generate an inventory of what they see. This is particularly relevant to clinical reasoning, especially that used in neurology, which emphasizes history and clinical observation and is a very visual specialty. Next slide, please. The visual thinking strategies method is to focus visual observations to enhance critical thinking and language skills. And it utilizes 3 questions to focus those observations. What do you see? What makes you say that? And what else do you see? So every time you look, you get the opportunity to look deeper. And you start to look deeper at form, line, shape, colors, scale, proximity. Observation is not just intuitive, and posing questions makes the process of observation more tangible. Awareness of observation as a process leads to more focus on becoming a better observer. And all of this helps to improve problem solving, decision making, learning, and focused attention. And in this picture, you see a group of individuals that we had recently at back in the last year before the pandemic at the Phoenix Art Museum doing an exercise in close looking. Next slide, please. So the role of the student, or any participant for that matter, in visual thinking strategies is to look carefully at the image, talk about what they observe, back up their ideas with evidence, listen and consider the views of others, and discuss the many possible interpretations. And we use this method quite a bit in our sessions at the Phoenix Art Museum. Next slide, please. So why do we use art at a medical school? Well, traditional skills and expertise are not enough to prepare future physicians. Ill-defined and unusual problems call for creativity, and creativity demands curiosity. It demands stepping out of our familiar comfort zones. So we use art to sharpen student skills in observation and description, to foster that critical thinking and improve communication, and as a vehicle to explore ethics. We challenge students to explore the range of human emotion and perception of the world as conveyed visually. And we do this through seminars, webinars, artist talks, workshops, and teaching methods that involve a range of creative activities. Next slide, please. So this is just a mind map to provide you with an overview of all the different things that we've incorporated into the Art and Medicine program at the UA College of Medicine, Phoenix. And you can see that our sessions that are held at the Phoenix Art Museum are just one of the many offerings that we have. We also focus on community, self-care, and reflection. And we have many experiential workshops where we are integrating art and medicine into the formal curriculum. Next slide, please. This is another example of a session we will typically hold at the Phoenix Art Museum, and the theme is skillful observation. Students were inspired to reflect on this sculpture by Rebecca Campbell to develop their skills of questioning and describing. And utilizing those visual thinking strategies, they were asked to come up with 10 nouns, 10 verbs, and 10 adjectives to describe this artwork. And next, the students were then asked to compose a haiku using some of these words. And this is one of the poems that was written. Bones are my structure. I crouch from the weight I bear. I am stitched from love. Next slide, please. So these types of activities are not just for medical students, as this recent article in the journal Neurology showed. An arts-based curriculum involving museum visits was effective in teaching residents to listen and observe more closely. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, our program also has a focus on self-care. And one of the activities we offer is the art of meditative pattern drawing that's modeled after the Zentangle method. Structured patterns are deconstructed into simple dots, lines, and curves, and repeated, the end result being a beautiful image. And these workshops help our students increase their focus and creativity, increase the sense of personal well-being, and bring a sense of artistic satisfaction. And when I look at the drawings of Cajal, I am drawn into finding the patterns that he saw. Next slide, please. This was a headline in the Arizona Republic the other day that caught my attention. Arizona is the fastest growing state for Alzheimer's disease, and it's only getting worse. Next slide, please. So community outreach is another important component to the Art and Medicine program. And this is actually how I met Gary and began working with Gary. We created the Creativity and Elder Care program for medical students, which has now been expanded to include other health professional students on our campus. And the program trains the students in the use of creative expression with elder patients. Students are trained in how to use poetry, dance, music, storytelling, and visual arts with elders and those with dementia. And you can see in this image here, students trained in the use of poetry, particularly what's known as call and response. Next slide, please. Once the students complete the 5-month training program, then they volunteer out in the community at these various places like the Suntree Adult Day Center, the Arts Engagement Program at the Phoenix Art Museum, and the Arts and Mind Program at the Mesa Center for the Arts. And this is a tremendous experience for our students. We actually documented a dramatic improvement in their empathy scores from the beginning of the program to the end of the program. But since we can't see these folks in person, as we've been socially distancing and we've been teaching online for a year now, we've started trying to do some of these events virtually. Next slide. One of the things we've started doing is music and medicine with students and elder participants from the Suntree Adult Day Center. And the elders join in directly from the center, while others who are not attending the center can join in from home. Students play musical instruments, sing songs, and they have a dialogue with participants. Everyone feels great at the end of the sessions. So we hope that once the pandemic eases and we can get back to doing things on campus, we can have Gary back on campus and we can do more with the Creativity and Elder Care program, because it's been a little while since he was on campus, right, Gary?
Yeah, it's been a little while, that's for sure. Thank you, Dr. Standley, for that beautiful talk on visual strategy thinking. One of my great honors in working with Dr. Standley is when I expressed to her interest in visiting the gross anatomy lab. And there she arranged for me to hold the brain of a person that had visible deterioration from Alzheimer's disease. And I wanted that moment to be imbued with insight, almost as if the brain was my muse. And as I held the inert grayish flesh, the formaldehyde filled my nostrils, and I knew that if there was inspiration, it was in the search for knowledge. So thank you, Dr. Standley, for that. I'm going to end this part, and we'll do a Q&A after this. This is a 3-minute video of my most current project of using science and poetry, in this case, using telepresence robots to provide programming at a long-term care community in Wisconsin. And here you will see me leading the residents in performing the poem I Carry Your Heart by E.E. Cummings using the call and response technique. If you want, as you are listening, you can say the lines with the residents. So here's a little bit of that poetry and robot project. Hi, I'm Gary Glazner, founder and executive director of the Alzheimer's Poetry Project. I'm excited to tell you about a partnership with ACD Direct to use telepresence robots to help reduce social isolation in long-term care communities. We also offer training for staff and families in using creativity as a communication tool to help improve the quality of life for people living in long-term care communities. Here are some examples of our work. All right, Marlene, so I will say a line of the poetry and you repeat after me, and that way we can perform together, okay?
Okay.
I carry your heart.
I carry your heart.
I carry it in my heart.
I carry it in my heart.
I'm never without it.
I'm never without it.
Anywhere I go, you go.
Anywhere I go, you go.
I carry your heart.
I carry your heart.
I carry it in my heart.
Carry it in my heart.
I'm never without it.
I'm never without it.
Wherever I go, you go.
Wherever I go, you go.
All right, give Lillian a round of applause. That was really beautiful.
I carry your heart.
I carry your heart.
I carry it in my heart.
I carry it in my heart.
I'm never without it.
I'm never without it.
Anywhere I go, you go.
Anywhere I go, you go.
All right, time out. I want to teach you a joke. One group that I work with in Brooklyn, where I'm at, they made a joke out of that line, and they say, anywhere I go, you go, Hugo.
All right.
Time in. Here we go. Anywhere I go, you go, Hugo.
Anywhere I go, you go. You go. You go.
All right, here we go. Here we go. Big finish. Lots of hand gestures. Here we go. I carry your heart.
Carry your heart.
I carry it in my heart.
Carry it in my heart.
Bump, ba-da-dum, bump.
Bum, bum, dum, bum.
Bump, bump. Marlene, a round of applause. That was beautiful. Thank you, Marlene.
You're welcome.
Q&A part of our program, and we have an opportunity to hear from you, take questions or comments that you want to make. Paul, you have anything to say if we head into
Yeah, I would just comment that what Gary and Cindy have demonstrated, I think, is increasingly recognized as not only appropriate, but necessary and beneficial for patients with cognitive impairment on that terrible downhill slope, Alzheimer's and other progressive dementias, that multisensory input through various modalities is stimulatory and beneficial for those patients. And I'm sure all of you clinicians who deal with Alzheimer's patients have seen or heard of patients essentially mute or immobile, reacting in unexpected, surprisingly good ways to music and other sensory input. So Gary and Cindy, thank you for really important contributions, I think, to all of our education.
Thank you, Paul. Dr. Standley, you have a comment and we can then take questions.
Oh, I think we learned so much about, so much more about Cajal and Lorca from both of your slides. And it was fascinating, again, to take a trip down memory lane and look at these drawings that they both have. I actually polled some of my peers. I am the director of the neuroscience course for our medical students, and I polled some of my peers across the country to see who still uses these Cajal drawings in their formal medical school curriculum. And I would say 9 out of 10 do. Very briefly, typically around the time that they're teaching about synaptic transmission. They have the opportunity to go into more detail of the history of neuroscience with the graduate students, but because of lack of time in our medical program, it's really hard to do that. But they virtually all of them, 90% or more, do mention Cajal in some fashion, along with Golgi.